Now I can talk. Okay, now you heard. Okay, now if you want to move up closer, go ahead and take your time now to move up closer. And I want to set the table for this event because a good friend sent me a quote by Mother Teresa, and I want to open with that. The good you do today may be forgotten tomorrow. Do good anyway. What you spend years building may be destroyed overnight. Build anyway. Give the world the best you have and you may get hurt. Give the world your best anyway. And in today's presentation, we're going to see someone give us his best. Amen. I've seen this 3 times and just want to keep seeing it. The Boy Who Saw True is an adaptation. It's based on an actual Victorian diary kept by a boy gifted with an extraordinary talent. He sees what others can't. Fairies, auras, spirits, ghosts. And I was thinking, sometimes your voice and your vision remains unheeded, ignored, or silenced in your lifetime. This presentation honors Boy's vision. The world may be a far more mysterious and glorious place than we know. Come on out, Harry, and take us there.
Yay! Woo! It's January 1st, 1885. My best chum Arnold said, or I thought he said, I'm going to keep a dairy in the new year. And so I said, oh, well, then I think I'll keep one too. And who knows, perhaps one day to be printed. When I told my elder sister Mildred, she said, oh, you're going to keep a dairy. What will you pay me to milk the cows? I said, what? She said, you can't even say the thing. Diary's your book. Dairy is buttermilk. Crikey. But when I told Pa, he said, that's right, my lad, to keep a diary. Though, always remember this. Thing worth doing at all is worth doing well. So, mind you, write it nicely. And if you don't know how to spell a word, you ask someone who does. And then Mama said, yes, that's right. And mind you, don't forget what your father says. Which I found very provoking. He could barely lift a finger without them giving me a lecture. Pa got up on the wrong side of bed today. He said, my liver's acting up. The bacon is too salt, my egg is hard-boiled, and that cat made another smell in the house. And then Mildred got very saucy and said, it's not our fault if Fluffy's got diarrhea. I do wish Mildred would not take liberties with Pa like that. I always know when he's got liver trouble, because his lights are all dirty. And she must know, too. So now he's talking to Mildred, and she just says, hold your noise. After church today, I asked, what does commit adultery mean? And Pa sort of looked at the ceiling and said, what next? And Ma frowned and said, don't ask so many questions. And Janet the maid went, oh! And she left the room post-haste. And we could hear her bursting outside the door. And so Mildred and I giggled, and Mama looked sternly and said, behave yourselves. But later I asked Mildred, why this thusness? She said, I don't know. I find it very funny, I must say, because committing adultery comes in the commandments, and the vicar reads them out in church. Ma took me to the dentist today. I asked him, Do you like fiddling inside people's mouths? He said, I don't much mind. I said, yes, but it must be a bit nasty for you if the people been eating onions. He said, well, yes, it's not too pleasant then. And Mama giggled a bit, but looked as if I ought to have passed that remark, because only common people eat onions. Ma looked poorly at dinner today. She sighed. Do wish we could do without eating. So do I when there's cold mutton, or that horrid rice pudding, or that awful blancmange. We started lessons again today at home with our governess, Miss Griffin. We're learning about scripture. I think Jehovah's a horrid old gentleman, but I love Jesus. And today was about Jesus' circumcision. So of course we had to ask Miss Griffin, what is a circumcision? And she said, I can't be sure, but I think it's when they cut a bit of skin out of a baby's forehead and it makes a mark. Mildred said, well, that must hurt like Billy-O. Do they give the baby chloroform? And Miss Griffin got a bit tight and said, no. So I said, well, can you tell us what adultery means? Ma wouldn't tell us. And she blushed and said, that you will understand when you are grown up. And she blew her nose. So Mildred said, well, you might tell us this much. Have you ever committed adultery? Oh, gracious dear, she said, of course not. And she turned red as a turkey cock. And so Mildred said, well, then I think you might tell us what it means, because if you don't, I shall look it up in the dick. She said, I forbid you to do any such thing. If you must know, I'd rather tell you myself. When a man is so wicked, he wants to marry someone who's married already, that's called committing adultery. Is that all? Said Mildred. Why didn't you tell us before? And I said, yes, why not? You didn't mind telling us about Cain and Abel the other day. And it would be much wickeder if I murdered Mildred than if I wanted to marry Auntie Maud who's married to Uncle John. And she said, no one ever marries their auntie. This afternoon was Ma's at home, and about 50 old ladies came and made an awful noise in the drawing room like the Tower of Babel. And in the middle of it, Mother shouted at us, children, come down and say how do you do. So after we had done this, told Mrs. Bennet and all the rest of them, and I had felt very uncomfy, she said, you can run along now. And that was that. Afterwards I asked her, who was the old party with eyebrows like Pa's mustache? She said, old party. Wherever did you pick that up? I said, Hobbs the gardener always calls people that. She said, well, that is very rude. You're not to let me hear you say it again. Shall jolly well say my diary if I want to. So don't see why I shouldn't. The Reverend Mr. Wilcox came to Sunday dinner today. Papa carved the fowl, and then there was ginger pudding, but I couldn't eat mine because something awful happened then. Mr. Wilcox said to Pa, why, Mildred gets more like her mother every day. And then Mildred, who was in a saucy mood and naughty, said, then I suppose if I grow up like mother, you'd want to marry me. Oh, well, of course, said Mr. Wilcox. Then, said Mildred, getting cheekier still, I expect that's because you really want to marry Mama. Oh, well, of course, said Mr. Wilcox again, and he winked at Pa. Then Mildred said, oh, you naughty man, you've committed adultery. A dreadful shindy ensued. Ma went red as a flannel petticoat. Mildred, leave the room! And Papa said some words in French, and I started blubbering. I said, it's not her fault. Miss Griffin said in scripture that if a man was to marry a lady who's married, it's called adultery. And Papa said, well, of all the... And then Miss Wilcox patted my back and said, never mind, little man, it's a funny world. And he gave me 2p for sweets. It was all horrid. Then And I saw Jesus standing at the end of my bed smiling at me. He has the most lovely lights, gold and green, pink, blue. He looked as if he wanted to comfort me for the horrid day I'd had. He has the most sweet blue eyes, long brown hair. He made me feel so happy. This is the third time I've seen him. I wish he'd come oftener. I asked my mom, do you often see Jesus? And Mildred giggled. So did Janet, who was handing the potatoes. And I wonder why. And I wonder why my mom wouldn't tell me, but only said, I am sure Jesus won't want to come to little boys who don't pay attention in church and who do not think of what they are saying. I can't make out why my mom won't believe me when I tell her things. She always used to. Mildred says I'm dotty. Susan, the cook, had a very red nose this evening, and she made a lot of rude noises. Not the very rude ones, the others. And so Mildred asked Janet about it, and Janet said, it's called belching. She tipples. And so Mildred asked Ma, why does the cook belch so much? And my mom said, belch. I suppose you picked up that horrid word from the service. You are never to let me hear you say it again, or I shall really have to forbid you to go into the kitchen. Mildred said, well, what do you call it? And my mom said, I don't mention such things at all. They're never spoken of in company. Why not, said I. Because, said my mom. And then Papa pulled a kind of a funny face and said, I suppose I must go upstairs now and wash my hands. Last night I saw Uncle Willie. He was sitting in Papa's chair smiling at us. And when Papa came home from business and given us our kisses, he almost sat there. I cried, no, Pa, don't sit there. Uncle Willie's sitting there. And my mom said, I really don't know what we're going to do with that child. And Papa said, what are you talking about, son? You know your Uncle Willie's been dead 2 years. Mildred, take him upstairs at once. But when we got to the nursery, I asked Mildred, didn't you see Uncle Willie? She said, of course not, you horrid little fibber. I couldn't make it out. I felt quite miserable. And then after I was in bed, my mom came in like she always does to give me my hug. But instead she sat down and said, I want to talk to you very seriously. Naughty little boys who tell such dreadful, wicked stories, like that about poor Uncle Willie, will never go to heaven. So you must promise never, never to say such things again. It wasn't a story, I said. I did see Uncle Willie. I saw him. It would be a wicked story if I said I hadn't. She stared at me a long time. And then she did a big sigh. Very well. She went away. And she did not hug me goodnight. And that made me feel so wretched, I cried, and I wished I could die. And then all of a sudden there was Jesus standing there, all shiny like the sunset. And he smiled so sweetly to me, as if to say, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And I thought I heard him say very softly, be at peace. And I felt happy again. I soon went to sleep. But today Ma's hardly spoken to me at all. Looks as though she doesn't love me anymore. I wish I could make it out, but I try not to mind so very much, because I know Jesus loves me and is not displeased with me. I asked my mom, why are your lights so much bluer when you're in church? And she said to Pa, I'm beginning to wonder if there's something wrong with the boy's eyes. And Papa said, more likely his liver. Why won't Ma tell me things when I ask her? I would like to know why there's lots of yellow, like buttercups, around Papa's head, and only blue around Mama's. Although sometimes when she hugs me very hard, they go pink. I'd like to know why Mildred's life is just a mess, like the yolk of a dirty egg. I've told her so too, and she just says, oh, shut up, you're dotty. I'd love to smack her bottom. Whenever I've asked her what my lights are like, she says, don't talk silly, you haven't got any lights. But I know she's fibbing, because one day I asked Janet, and Janet said, Master, your lights are all colors, like that lovely stuffed bird in your Papa's glass case. I was taken to town today to see about my eyes. The doctor held up a big card all covered up with letters, which I was to read aloud. And then later, I heard him say to Mama, there's nothing to worry about, madam. The little gentleman has perfect sight. And then today, a funny old doctor came to see me. And he asked me all sorts of odd questions, like, do you ever hear noises when no one is in the room? I said, yes. I often hear my mother's voice in the kitchen shouting at the servants. He said, I don't mean that kind of noise. And so I don't know what it did mean. But he was very kind. He had nice lights. Arnold came to tea today. He played snap on my bed. I said, how's your diary coming along? He said, oh, I gave that over ages ago. It's too much sweat. I said, Arnold, I said that word once and Mama said, only common people sweat, but gentlemen perspire. He said, well, I've seen my pa wipe himself more than once and say I'm sweating like a pig. Oh. And as I believe Arnold's father is a gentleman, perhaps Mama's mistaken. Mama said, we are going to a place in Birkdale called a Hydro. And it's like a big hotel where people get water all over them to make them feel better. But Mildred can't go. She has to stay with Auntie Jane. She said that's a beastly shame. Of all the aunts, Auntie Jane is most particular. Once. Ha. We're here. I loved riding on the train. It was so lovely to look out the window and see all the sheep and the cows in the field, the trees all out in blossom. I didn't like the tunnels though, because a lot of thick smoke poured through the windows. It made a horrid smell. And I felt shy because I thought people might think it was me. There's a lovely old body sitting opposite with pretty lights, mostly pink and blue. And I wanted to speak to her, but I was afraid my mom might get vexed if I did, because she was only a common woman. But we smiled at each other now and then when my mom was not looking. I have never stayed at such a big house before. I had my meals with so many people who talk all at once. And instead of servants like Janet, men hand the dishes, all dressed up like Papa when he goes to a grand party. But there are servants like Janet who empty the slops and make the beds, and those are called chambermaids. Mine is called Sarah. She's a brown mark on her cheek with 3 hairs sticking out. Mama said, that is a mole. You are never to mention it to Sarah. She's Welsh. I said, do all Welsh people have moles? She said, no, but many Welsh women are servants. I had a Turkish bath today, and I perspired like a pig. And there were these crowds of naked old parties sitting around, looking very rum. I do hope when I'm grown up I shan't have a beard growing on my chest. In church today, there was a lady sitting in our pew whose inside made funny noises. A bit like when I pulled the plug in the closet, like, going out. I giggled once and then I got an awful fright because I laughed in church, which is very wicked. I've been thinking a lot about church today. If I were God, I wouldn't want people all over the place to recite the same things out of books every Sunday, because that'd be silly. God made the world, so God must be very clever. And I don't think clever people like silly things. They like clever things. Mr. Wilcox said when people are very clever, they don't like being told how clever they are, because it makes them feel uncomfy. Oh, I'm sure poor God must feel very uncomfy on Sundays. We had a picnic today. My new friend Marjorie has an aunt, Miss Wakem, and she hired a pony cart. And we went and had our tea under the trees. And afterwards, we fed the pony buns with our hands, and it was so much fun. Love ponies and horses. I saw 4 little elves looking at us as if they thought us very funny. And then off they ran. I nudged Miss Wakem. Look at the little elves. She said, what? Where? But she said she couldn't see them. Perhaps it's because she wears spectacles. I was reading a book today by Charles Dickens called Pickwick Papers, and Pa took it away from me. He said, you'll learn bad words out of that. Read this instead. It was a book by Walter Scott, and I must say, when I saw pictures of it, inside of men killing each other, I didn't fancy it much. I wonder why people who make up stories always make them about fighting and sticking swords into each other. Because it's a dirty trick. What's the good anyhow? Besides, stories about people who died always make me cry. Which I know is silly, because I know they don't die really. Grandpa and Uncle Willie look a lot better now than they did on Earth. I just saw Grandpa and he said, you're quite right, my boy, we're much happier too. Cousin Agnes, Auntie Jane, and Mildred have all come to visit. Mildred said, I hate Auntie Jane like Billy. She's a beastly old cat. The other day I told her, I'm going to become an actress when I grow up. And she said, actresses are common, wicked women, and no lady would ever want to be one. So I said, oh, all right then, I don't want to be a lady. She said, don't your room for being forward. I think Auntie Jane isn't fair, because Papa told me Shakespeare was one of the cleverest men that ever lived. So what would be the good of him making all his plays if it's wicked to act in them? And why would it be wicked anyhow? After all, it's just plain pretend. A rum-looking party called Miss Salt. What a funny name. She's staying here, and she has short hair like what Papa calls a rat's back, and she talks in a manly voice, and she has an old gentleman in her lights. So when we're sitting in the drawing room with Cousin Agnes, I said, why have you got an old gentleman sticking to you? She jumped and said, God bless my soul, what is the little boy talking about? And Cousin Agnes went a bit red, as if I'd said something rude, and she laughed a bit. So I said, this old gentleman I see, he looks a bit like Mr. Pickwick in the Dickens book, but this gentleman isn't nearly so jolly looking. He's got a nasty red mark on his cheek. She said, good gracious, that was Mr. And she said some name I can't remember. And then she stared at me, very uncomfy. And finally she uttered, well, must go wash my paws for tea. And she left the room, and when she did, Cousin Agnes said, why did you say that to that lady? That was such a strange thing to say. I said, well, it was true, so why shouldn't I? The next morning, Miss Salt came by. Hello, I was going to take a little walk down by the seashore. Would you like to come? So I had to say yes, as not to be rude. And when we got there, I was sitting on the lovely hot sand. She said, how did you know about the old gentleman? I said, oh, I can see his face in your lights. She said, well, what do you mean by my lights? I said, well, the colors round people, of course. She said, what colors? I've never heard of that. I said, well, you must be short-sighted. She said, no, I'm not. I said to myself, dear me, what is the matter with everybody? So I said, oh, you were very poorly once, weren't you? She said, oh, yes. How did you know that? I said, I don't know. But I do know. And I also know that you had a sweetheart you was going to marry, but he had to go away first, a long way off. And he got hurt, and he never came back again. She said, I'll tell you what, little boy. I said, yes, Miss Salt. Though I'd like to have called her Miss Pepper for fun. She said, upon my word, I believe you've got second sight. That's when people know things without being told. I said, oh, I reckon you're wrong there, Miss Salt. There are a fine lot of things I do not know, and I have to ask Miss Griffin. Like, what is a circumcision? What is covering your neighbor's ass or his arse? So many things I don't. She said, no, I don't mean those kinds of things. I mean things like what happened a long time ago, like me being so poorly. But she reached in her satchel and pulled out a funny old photograph and said, do you know who that is? I said, that's the old gentleman. She said, yes, quite right. Here's sixpence. Buy some lollipops. We're home now. That funny old doctor came to see me again today. He said, you're looking better for a change of air. Do you still see things? I said, oh yes. He said, well now, tell me what you've seen. I said, well, I've seen Jesus and a lot of little elves, and I saw an old gentleman beside a Miss Salt and a few other things. Oh, tut there. That was a funny thing to see, wasn't it? He meant the old gentleman. And I said, yes, it was a bit rum, but you're not to tell Mama. He said, don't worry, doctors can always keep a secret. Do you see anything now? I said, I do. I see an old woman standing right behind you with a kindly face and a sweet smile. She's nodding. She's white hair, part in the middle, and it comes down in ringlets on the sides, and a lace cap upon her head, and a lace shawl about her shoulders. And she just told me she's your mother. Oh dear me. Oh dear me. And then Mama came into the room and they went off together. I am in Harrogate now, and I think staying with Auntie Maud and Uncle John is most satisfactory. There's some my cousin Basil asked me, you know how babies come? I said, oh yes, Miss Griffin told us. Doctors bring them in a leather bag. And he laughed at me in a most provoking way and said, you're a booby not to know they come from women's insides. I said, I don't believe that at all. He said, well, it's true. A boy told me so at school. There's a lovely old tree in Uncle John's garden. I sat a long time looking at a funny little gnome who lives inside it. He has long, slender legs and a red cap, and the rest of him is the color of the trunk of the tree. And sometimes he comes out of his tree, and he goes prancing about in the grass in such a funny way I want to giggle, but I'm afraid I might make him offended. But when I asked Basil about the gnome, he poked fun at me and said, "There's no such things. You're a little ass to believe such fiddlesticks." And I asked old James the gardener about the gnome, and he said, "Well, master, if I was your age, there's no telling what I'd see. But I'm getting older now, and my eyes ain't what they used to be." A clergyman named Mr. Ramsbottom came to luncheon today with Auntie Maud. I'm mighty glad Basil's not there, because I know we'd have giggled. And this Mr. Ramsbottom talks an awful lot. And Auntie Maud is such a polite lady. She kept saying, "Oh yes, Mr. Ramsbottom? Is that so, Mr. Ramsbottom? Fancy that, Mr. Ramsbottom. I nearly wet my knickerbockers trying not to burst." And when he now and again passed a remark to me, I thought it would do to say, "Yes, sir," because I could not take it upon myself to say, "Yes, Mr. Ramsbottom." Mamma fetched me home yesterday. Fancy, Mr. Wilcox arrived in a cab. He's feeling poorly, so Mamma invited him to our house to be ill. Mildred said he's got a carbuncle somewhere. I think Mr. Wilcox's carbuncle is where he sits down, because I saw a bit of a shadow there in his lights. Come to find out, Mr. Wilcox's carbuncle is on his bottom. He told me so himself, it's a great secret. And then he said, "I'd like to see a few bumptious people get a carbuncle on their bums. That'd soon take him down a peg or two." "Don't tell anyone I said that." I love Mr. Wilcox. He's so amiable. Comes up with these naughty things now and then. I'm writing my diary in the arbor. I love the smell when the flowers are out. I love to feel the air on my face. I wish I didn't have to wear clothes. It'd be so lovely to feel the air all over. Mr. Wilcox played piano to me today. I see the most beautiful things when I hear music. I'm sure there must be lots of music in heaven. Though I don't believe people sit around all day playing on harps. Papa thinks music's silly. He says, "But I can't tell God Save the Queen from Pop Goes the Weasel." Mama said, "We're going to a place in Keswick. It's in the lakes, and Mr. Wilcox is to come with us." Oh, what fun! We're here, and I have seen crowds of elves and gnomes and fairies. It's simply lovely. A young lady and gentleman came to our lodgings last night, and Papa said, "They must be on their honeymoon. Their luggage looks brand new." Well, this couple was put into a room with one bed right next to mine, and in the middle of the night I woke up to a thud, and then I heard these awful sounds like someone was being hurt. And so I told them about her breakfast this morning, and Mama blushed and sort of giggled. And Papa said some long word in French, like "avant terrible," or some such, which I found very confounding. I've been thinking I never see Jesus in church. I wonder why. I don't suppose he can be in all churches at once, so perhaps one day it'll be our turn. I'm in school now. There's a Miss Enid, and I'm in her class, and I don't like her lights, and I find her very frightening. She had a girl in our class recite a poem today called Little Jim, and it was so sad I began to cry. And Miss Enid said, "What are you making that noise for?" I said, "I can't help it. The poetry's so mournful." She said, "Don't be silly, or I shall have to punish you." And then the children laughed at me for being such a booby. And then on the playground, the boys called me a crybaby. I think Miss Enid is a hard, unkind old maid. She's nearly always cross. And when she gets into a real wax, my heart goes all queer and does pit-a-pat. Today's my birthday. Before I went to sleep, I saw Grandpa. He said, I wish you many happy returns. I said, how'd you know it's my birthday? He said, I sort of knew it from your thoughts. I love old Grandpa. He feels so kind. I wonder how much dead people like Grandpa can see. Can they see us when we're bathing? Or when we're using the closet? Oh, I'm sure Mama would be quite put out if Grandpa were to turn up in one of those places. Oh, but I don't suppose he would, because that would be rude. I don't think nice dead people go where they're not wanted. Uncle Robert was found dead in his bed. The funeral's tomorrow, and I suppose I shall have to wear a black coat. I'd like to wear something colourful and cheerful, because it seems very funny to me that people should stick on black because other people have gone to have a good time in Spirit Land. Why couldn't I wear yellow or pink or blue? I just saw Grandpa. He said, you're quite right, my boy. I can't bear school. And I am in such a funk of Miss Enid that whenever I go to say my French verbs, they fly out of my head, even though I knew them quite well at home. Well, today something happened which paid her out grand. A little boy named Jimmy Cole said, excuse me, Miss Enid, may I please leave the room? She said, no, you may not leave the room. Jimmy Cole went, and he did number one on the floor. Oh! And Miss Enid had to wipe it up with the towel she used to wipe the blackboard with. By God, wasn't she in a rage. But she couldn't say much to Jimmy because it was her own fault. And then later that day, she'd snatch up our exercise books, and if she found one mistake, she'd throw it on the floor. Pick it up! You're all enough to try the patience of Job! I hate Mondays when I have to go back to school. I have this awful feeling in my middle, and my heart goes pit-a-pat, and I don't want to eat when I get home. And finally, Mama said, darling, what is the matter with you? You're so white, and you're not eating enough. I said, I think it's Miss Enid. She gives me the Jim Jams. And Mama said, what? Perhaps it's something else, but I know better. I saw Grandpa in my room tonight. He said, you will soon see a doctor. Be sure and tell him about your school mistress. It's very important that you do, so don't forget. Grandpa was right. Doctor came to see me today. But I didn't want to tell him about Miss Enid with Mama in the room. And then suddenly someone came to the door about a subscription or something. So Mama had to leave us for a bit. And when she did, I told the doctor all about Miss Enid and that awful feeling in my middle. And my heart going pit-a-pat and all. And then Mama came back into the room and said, you can run along now. But the doctor stayed a long time talking to her. I know because I saw his carriage out the nursery window. It's there for ages. Before I went to sleep, Grandpa showed up and said, we did it. We sent that person along for the subscription just then to get your mother out of the room. Cheer up, my lad, we're looking after you. And soon you will learn there will be no more school. What? There will be no more school. Oh, I can jump up to the ceiling. I could indeed. Oh, thank you, Grandpa. What a relief. Oh, I'm so happy. I wonder what's to become of me now. I have a tutor now. He comes to the house. His name is Mr. Patmore. And I like him very much, not a bit afraid of him. He has a little white beard, like a nanny goat, and a humorous look in his eye. He's not at all like Miss Edith. He said, I'm sure we'll get along like a house afire. I said, I'm sure too. He said, well, that's good, that's very good. By the way, where's the WC? It's always good to know the geography of a place. I said, I thought geography had to do with maps. He said, oh, well, that too, that too. Then we had a lovely lesson. And before he left, he clapped me on the back and said, keep your pecker up, old man. Do your studies well. We'll make a great scholar of you in no time. I'm so happy of Mr. Patmore. There's something up with Ma. This morning, all of a sudden, she got sick right in the coal box because she couldn't make it to the closet in time. She got all fat about the middle, like the vicar. I asked Mildred, and she said, oh, well, she'll soon be thin again. I said, how do you know that? She said, never you mind. I said, Mildred, have you noticed anything different about her lights? She said, do you mean to tell me you still pretend to see your silly lights? I think you are cracked, or else you're the greatest fibber I've ever struck. Fibber yourself, said I, unless you're blind as a bat. She said, well, don't boil your head. Me a fibber indeed. It's a queer thing, but I'm to go and stay with Auntie Ma and Uncle John for a week. And before I left, Janet said, Master, when you return, you might find a lovely surprise. Well, I'm here. Sometimes I take a book into the greenhouse, and the gardener comes in to water the flowers. I told him, the gnome's still there? Oh, you don't say. Well, that's a fine old tree. We're going to have to do a bit of lopping one of these days. I said, but you're not going to cut down the tree, are you? Because I'm afraid that would break the little chap's heart. He seems so proud of his tree. Oh, no, set your mind to rest, Master. We'll just cut off some of the top branches, and then they'll sprout all the merrier. Oh, I'm mighty glad to hear that. Auntie Maud received a letter from Pa this morning. Fancy, I've got a little sister. I said, how old is she? Auntie Maud said, what do you mean, how old? She's just a tiny baby. I merely asked because if doctors bring them in bags, can't they keep them in there for a bit? You know, like people keep eggs. She said, aren't you pleased? I said, I don't know. I have to think about it a bit. I don't much fancy a baby about the place. They slobber, and they squawk, and they smell. When my mom made me kiss that baby and Mrs. Stick in the muds, I thought it appalling. She said, upon my word, you are a caution. Wonder why everyone thinks me such a caution. What is a caution, anyhow? Well, I'm home. That baby's an ugly-looking concern. How it does squawk. And Mama looks her old self again. So I suppose it was the baby after all, and all the talk about doctors bringing babies in bags was all a bunch of flat doodle. Something happened today so queer you could have knocked me over with nothing. Mr. Patmore brought me a letter that I'd sent him while I was away to show me some spelling mistakes. But then he said, oh, and I was very amused by the little gnome you pretended to see in the tree. I said, pretended? I didn't pretend, I saw it. And it looked rather serious. He said, are you a truthful little boy? I said, very truthful. He said, do you suppose you might have a very vivid imagination? I said, I'm quite sure it wasn't my fancy. Well, he said, still serious. But that wasn't the end of it. Later we had geography, and he was pointed to a map of Canada, and he said, I was in Canada once, And I don't know why, but I was in one of my knowing moods. So I said, you won't get cross if I tell you something? I promise. You were on a big boat when you went to Canada, and on the boat, you met a miss, and you got sweet on her, and you thought you might like her for your missus. And then after you got to Canada, you didn't see her for a bit, and then when you did see her again, you got sort of disappointed, and you said to yourself, I won't fancy her for my missus after all. How the dickens did you know that? He said. I nearly forgot about it myself. Oh, be jiggered. How? I said, I don't know. It just comes to me. Well, that's extraordinary. Can you tell me anything else? I was just about to say no when I saw an odd-looking spirit in the room with a great big hat. And he said, ask him if he remembers Sam North. So I did. And Mr. Patmore said, don't I remember that fine gent? Why? I said, because he's standing right there. Can't you see him? Oh, go on with you. Of course I can't see him. Oh, I wish I could. And Mr. North said, tell him he'll see me all right when he gets over here. So after he left, I told him. And Mr. Patmore said, big chicken again. I don't know how you could have known about that lady on the boat. Or about Sam North. So, well, now will you believe me when I tell you I've seen a gnome? He said, I don't think you were telling a lie. Papa told me today's the first day of spring. Fine day it's been too. Sunny and warm. Upon my word, it's a fine thing to wake up and hear birds singing like mad, and hear the cocks crowing in Smith's yard, and hear the hens all clucking, and see the buds coming out on the trees, getting all fat and sticky. Mama's bosom friend, Mrs. Chambers, is coming to dinner tonight with her husband. And she said, when they arrive, you are not to pass any personal remarks. I said, what do you mean? Oh, you mean about Mr. Chambers' wig? She said, I mean about anything. I said, oh, all right, don't worry. I'll keep mum. I said, I'll keep mum. When I was in cathedral today, I was wondering an awful lot about God. Though I know Mama would say, it is wicked to question what we are told. But then I heard Jesus say, my son, it is never a sin to think, but it is not always wise to tell one's thoughts to others. Henry and Arnold and I were allowed to take sandwiches and go for a long walk in the woods today to pick bluebells. It was just lovely. I saw these funny little dwarfs doing something to the leaves of a huge old beech tree. Henry can pull some awful faces. And he's very clever at belching too. He did some fine ones for us. Except once he overdid it a bit, he almost got sick. He said, sometimes at home when my pa belches, he makes as if it had only been a cough, like I was asked to Charlie Baines to tea this afternoon. Miss Enid used to call him Mr. Lazy Lump, which I thought was going too far, because if he is a lump, he can't help being as he's made. So, after tea, he pulled out his eggs. Some of them were ever so pretty, but I couldn't help saying, I think it is a cruel, mean trick to go and take the eggs away from the poor little birds after they built their nests and are so happy and all. Charlie wasn't of the same mind. You know, he was talking to him, he just looked at me like a cow. Only he's not got such beautiful eyes as some cows I've met with. He asked me, do you believe in ghosts? I said, yes. He said, you ever seen one? I said, lots. He said, on a bright? On a bright, said I. He said, weren't you afraid? I said, no, not when they're nice ghosts. I don't like the nasty ones. The servants say there's a ghost in this house. They're quite right, I said. I've seen it. It's a young lady. I saw her standing on the stair. She has a long dress, almost down to the floor, and it sticks out all round. And it makes sort of a noise when she moves, like... Do you mean that, or are you fooling? Honor bright, said I. Upon my Sam, he said, you make me feel all funny. I said, go on, she won't hurt you. She's quite a respectable kind of ghost. It means no harm. The baby isn't quite as ugly as it was, but that's not saying much. Mr. Patmore said, since we've had our talks, I've been reading about something called spiritualism, and I would like you to come to my home for tea this Saturday. My missus would like to meet you. We had a grand tea, hot buttered currant buns with lots of jam, and Mrs. P was ever so pressing. Have some more, have some more. And afterwards I saw a big black dog sitting by Mr. Patmore's feet. And I said, did you ever have a big black dog? Both looked so sad. And Mrs. Patmore said, yes, we did. He was called Jacques. He died last autumn. Why? I said, because he's sitting right there by the chair. And he knows we're talking about him because he's wagging his tail. Oh, and they were so surprised. And they were so pleased. Mr. Patmore said, I knew animals ought to have souls. And before I left, I saw a spirit. He said, I am Mrs. Patmore's papa. So I told her, and she said, what's he look like? I said, he has sort of sticky out teeth. She said, my pop did have sticky out teeth, rather. So the spirit said, please tell them to keep up with that spiritualism, as it'll make all the difference in their lives. So I told them, and they were very pleased. It is ripping to make people feel kind of happy. Mr. Patmore found out that the lights I see around people's called an aura. So I told him, well now some people's auras are just a horrid mess. Nothing but a muddle. But other people's auras are bright and pretty with lots of lovely colors. I said some people's auras end in a hard outline, like Mama's. But other people's auras sort of get thin at the edges, like a soft cloud. I told him his aura is very beautiful, with lots of gold and green and blue, orange. He was delighted. We've just been to Ilkley to attend Cousin Agnes's wedding, and during the wedding, she had to promise to love, honor, and obey Mr. Hopkins. I thought that was a bit much. What if Mr. Hopkins turned out to be a very wicked man and told his bride, don't grab that lady's handbag, and then she'd have to do it? I wonder who made up the marriage ceremony. I'm sure it wasn't God or Jesus. Mama said, for your holiday, you are going to a place called Harlock, Wales, and you are to go with Mr. and Mrs. Patmore. Oh, what fun. We've been here a week. I got a letter from Mama this morning. She said, I hope you're attentive in church on Sunday. Mr. Patmore and I did not go to church on Sunday. We went for a walk instead. Mr. Patmore said, well, I believe one can worship God in church, of course, but I also believe one can worship God by being in nature and feeling thankful for all the beautiful things he's given us. I am of the same mind, to be sure. Grandpa showed up. He said, heaven isn't a bit like what people think. It's much nicer. And by, crowds of people will believe in the spirits, much like they believe in Jesus now. And when they do, they'll be so much happier. And they won't mind such an awful lot about death. I said, if you die when you're old, do you stay old when you get to heaven? He said, no. Where I am, you can look however you want to look. Young, old, whatever you like. I appear old when I come to visit you, so you'll recognize me. Oh, I said. Oh, he said. Fancy this one. Some spirits don't know they're dead. I said, what? He said, oh, it's true. Later that night, there was a spirit in the room who did not know he was dead. And here's the corker. He was a man who did not believe in spirits. He'd been a friend of Mr. Patmore's. So when he appeared, he said, hello, Patmore, fancy seeing you here. And so I repeated that and everything else to Mr. Patmore, and Mr. Patmore took notes. And so Mr. Patmore said, hello, who are you? Man said, what a question, who am I? I'm Jimmy Cliff. Don't you recognize me? Mr. Patmore said, no, Jimmy Cliff. Oh, I'll be blown, Jimmy Cliff. No, I can't recognize you, can't see you. What? He said, I'm awfully glad you've come, Jimmy. Tell me how you're feeling. I've never felt better in my life. Physically. Mentally, I seem a bit confused. It's damn queer. Mr. Patmore said, now you used to not believe in spirits. I suppose you've altered your views now? I have not. Why should I? Well, surely you believe in an afterlife now. I don't believe in anything of the kind. Who's the lad, by the way? Why is he repeating to you everything I say? Because he can see and hear you and I can't. Have you gone blind and deaf? No, of course not. It's just that now you're a spirit and I can't see spirits. No, I'm not a spirit. I don't believe in spirits. I never did. But surely you can't believe you're still walking on this earth. Jimmy, can you remember what happened to you recently? Yes, I remember feeling infernally ill. And then I lost all consciousness. And then I woke up feeling better than ever. Yes. yes. So, then what? Look here, Patmore, I resent all this interrogation. And you writing everything down, I say, like a policeman. I'm so sorry, my dear Cliff. It's just I am very interested in what you have to say. You don't seem to realize that you are what we call dead. No, I appreciate you feel much more alive. What rubbish! I'm not dead. When we die, that's the end of us. You always did annoy me when we got talking on this topic. You won't face facts. You can't get round science. I'm leaving. Goodbye. And he left. And Mr. Patmore said, he hasn't changed a bit. After dinner tonight, I asked, what does it mean to lust after a woman in one's own heart? And Mrs. Patmore sort of half laughed and half looked as if she didn't know where to look. And Mr. Patmore said, there's some parts of the Bible which I just can't explain just now. I suppose it was something rude. When Henry came to visit, I asked him, and he said, lust. Has something to do with making babies, I think, but I'm not sure what. Wish I knew. Henry and I caught a man sprawling all over a woman in the sandhills. Henry said, when common people want to get married, they often do that beforehand. Oh. And then in the upper hills, I saw these great big stones sticking straight up. Rather queer-looking blokes in hooded black robes, kind of praying and doing peculiar things. Mr. Patmore said, those might have been the Druids of long ago. They were good men and ever so wise. Fancy. And then I saw some sheep in the fields with such sad-looking faces. Makes me feel awful they go and get killed for us to have with our suppers. Mr. Patmore said there's some kinds of people called something like vegetators, and they won't eat sheep or cows or anything. That's what I should like to be.
Queer-looking spirit appeared tonight with a bald head and a long white beard and a robe of black down to the floor,
And he seemed to be giving us some kind of a sermon.
He said, "Hearken well to my words. Behold, it is given but to the elect to hear the voice of the spirits. Therefore be thankful to the Lord thy God for the blessings he hath bestowed upon thee and thy wife through the instrumentality of this boy his servant. Lo, in the days of yore, the voice of the spirits could be heard by the righteous, but in latter days man hath turned away from the paths of God, and have offered himself up to the paths of iniquity, and unrighteousness, and blah, 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 blah. He went on and 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 on. And when he finally cleared off, Mr. Pamela said, "What a pompous old gentleman." And Grandpa popped in and said, "I did it for fun. I did it for fun. I told him to come and give you two a bit of a sermon." You see, he'd been a preacher whilst on earth, and now he's got to spirit land. He does not want to shut up preaching. You mustn't think people change all of a sudden when they turn their toes up. It takes some people a long time, as you reckon it, to become different. A man doesn't change when he takes off his overcoat. He does not change when he takes off his body. "Oh," I said. "Oh," he said. Home. My baby sister still squawks an awful lot, but in all events, she's not nearly so ugly, which is a great advantage. The pater often reminds me for kissing Fluffy. I can't help it. She's so soft and warm. I'm much preoccupied now with the two little kittens, which she washes a great deal. Oh, how awful it would be if women had to lick their babies all over like that. I got a horrid fright last night. My number 2 was all red like blood. And so Mama called in the doctor and asked me odd questions, and then he wrote out a subscription for some beastly medicine. And then later I saw Grandpa in my room. He said, "You look worried, lad." So I told him about my number 2. And he said, "I don't see anything wrong with you there. Have you been eating beets?" I said, "Yes." He said, "There you go. It's the beets. Nincompoop doctors always look for trouble when there is none." I said, "What am I to do with the hard medicine?" He said, "You ought to throw it in the sink and pretend you've taken it." Oh dear, Grandpa, what a relief. I've been sort of seeing things that seem to have happened a long time ago, with people all dressed up in funny old-fashioned clothes. And then I heard Jesus say, "My son, this is not your first life on earth. Souls do return, and those ye have loved, you meet again to rejoice, and those ye have hated, you meet again to suffer, and if wise, to forgive." I saw something today. It was like a dream, but I was wide awake. And what I saw was myself sitting in a cave all by myself. I was nearly naked. And my skin was all brown like chocolate. The weather was awfully hot, but I felt happy and peaceful inside, as if I loved the whole world. And a boy walked in with sort of a towel wrapped around his head. And he bowed before me and handed me a bowl with something to eat in it. I think I was very old, and this boy sort of looked after me. He wasn't a son, but like a pupil of some sort. And then later, some men walked in, also with towels on, and they bowed before me. And I taught them things which sounded very wise. Oh, I can't remember a thing I said. Well, wonders never cease. Fancy, I've been wrong about Jesus this whole time. Tonight I heard him say,
My son, be not sad if I tell you I am not Jesus. It is time you know that I am another one who has been your teacher through many lives. I appeared to you as Jesus because his image is familiar to you, and because he is one whom you love and whom you trust to help you. We call ourselves the Elder Brothers. You may call me EB for short. I live in an Eastern body, which I have the power to leave at will and appear in spirit to those who have the capacity to see. And that capacity you developed in the Indian life which you recalled the other day in your vision. Your powers in one life appear as talents in later lives. No effort is lost. My. Oh my, when I hear the EB speak, he sounds so kind and gentle. Not at all like that preacher who sort of bellowed at us, like a bull in a Chinese shop. One night Mr. Patmore asked the EB, "What must one do so as not to come to earth again?" He said, "Do good for its own sake. It is sometimes our strong attachment to desires that lasso us back into returning. But unattachment is not being dependent on anything for one's own happiness. The only true and lasting happiness is to be found within." An Irish spirit came tonight. God bless you all. That's a grand thing to be seeing, your poor souls, still caged in your bodies like birds in an aviary, flying a little bit here, a little bit there, but no getting away at all, at all. It's a fine thing to be seeing a boy with second sight as keen as the eyes of an eagle. If the blind ones of earth only knew we are not in a dank, dusty grave. And me, such an ignorant man whilst on earth, always worrying about going to hell. I might go to hell. I don't want to go to hell. What if I go to hell? But let ye know, if there be a hell, it is of man's creation. For here's a world of joy and loveliness, and music and flowers, butterflies. And we are happy and light as a bit of thistledown floating on the breezes of a summer's morning. You shining the light of truth from your heart with the milk of human kindness. Keep listening to the voices of the spirits, lad. Saw a queer spirit dressed up in a sailor suit later. He said, "I was drowning in the sea a short while ago. I want you to give a message to me old ma. She lives nearby. Please." So I took down the address he gave me and I gave it to Mr. Patmore. And then the sailor said, "Tell her to give over grieving like that. Makes me so bloody miserable. I'd be quite happy here with my mates if only me old ma would stop blubbing. Makes my heart ache. I tried to tell her myself she can't hear me. Tell the old gal to smile. Tell her I'm alive. I'm alive and I'm here and I'm hanging around her if only she could see me. Please." So Mr. Patmore went to see that old woman, and when he came back, he said that she was the most narrow-minded old female he'd ever struck. And it was like talking to a cartload of bricks. When he gave her the message, she said, "That's the devil's doing. My son is dead, and he will not rise until the day of resurrection." Still, Mr. Patmore talked nearly till doomsday, and finally he came back with his tail between his legs, and the sailor turned up and said, "I was there the whole time. I saw it was a no-go." You know what it is? It's these bloody parsons what stuff folks up with lot bloody rot, which makes agony for poor old gals like me ma, with their fear-filled lies. And there are parsons over here now who feel very sorry for the lies they told. They want to make amends.
Or the poor mater. She'd probably go up in spontaneous combustion. Grandpa brought a scientist spirit tonight. When I was on Earth, I was a man of science, and I maintained that the end of the body was the end of all consciousness. Not so. So, what are the facts? We, my dear sirs, we are the facts. We're here. We survive to refute the negation of survival. But because not every person can perceive us, it is argued that we do not exist. That is ignorance of a fundamental cosmic principle, vibration. Our spiritual bodies vibrate at a higher rate than do your physical bodies, which is why only those with clairvoyance can see those higher vibrations of nature, not visible to the ordinary naked eye. Mr. Patmore said, who is talking to us now? Is it your soul? It is more like a garment of my soul. Now later on, I shall shed this garment, and I shall live in a yet higher world of consciousness, the vibrations of which are still more rapid, and the substance of which is still more rarefied, and not so dense. And here's a point worthy of note. All progress is a step toward greater happiness. An elder brother came tonight, and he said, love, my sons, is a bridge between you and the unseen. On the wings of love, your mind may fly to us. And if there is a problem that frets you or confuses you, think of us who love, and still the ripples of your mind. Listen with your inner self, and receive your answer. My sons, there is but one life manifesting through all forms, and there is but one self manifesting through all selves, and that self is one with love. In your scripture, it says, love thy neighbor as thyself. And ye deem it to mean love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. But it means love thy neighbor as thyself, for he is one with yourself, as there is but one self. Many waves come up out of the sea, yet all are one with the sea. So it is with thyself and thy neighbors. Only when mankind realize this will problems end and bliss be known. Peace be with you. Tonight, Grandpa came. He gave us a talking to about love. He said, in the spirit world, it's love what counts. And the grand people here are not the ones who used to be lords and ladies and dukes and duchesses. The grand people here are the ones who shine the most with the light of love. You have to love everybody, be they ever so humble or ever so wicked. People on earth sort of try to hide their love or smother it as if they thought it wrong or milk sloppy. They oughtn't to do that. Love's the most beautiful thing in the world. It's what holds the world together. If God were not love, the world would go to smithereens. When you meet a body you don't like, say inside yourselves many times, peace be with you. Peace be with you. You might feel a bit differently about them. When folks can't see the good in others, it's often due to just silly pride. But to learn to be more humble and feel kind and loving toward everyone. Then he looked at me. You keep up with that writing, Sonny. Mark my words, it will get printed one day. I said, oh? He said, oh? Yes, indeed. And it will help to lighten the darkness. And don't you forget what your grandpa says. Go on. I don't know what he means by lighten the darkness, but I shall persevere with my diary. Not my dairy, my diary. I shall persevere with my diary.
Bravo!
Oh, I feel as if I've been in 10 rounds. That was Harry. No, Harry.
Harry, this is for you.
I wanted to, we're gonna talk and everything, and across the way, we've got some snacks and coffee. But before that, I do want to acknowledge Judith Hendra.
Yes.
She is co-founder of the Topanga Actors Company. And she's the one who gave the boy who saw True, its start nearly a year ago.
Yep.
And she's also the one who's been a great champion of it ever since. And Harry says he wouldn't be doing it if it weren't for Judith.
If I could just add, Judith is co-founder, as you said, Topanga Actors Company, and it's a wonderful group. Judith has a nose for news as far as finding excellent plays which are little known, and the actors read them, but so convincingly, it's like seeing a live performance. And they're all for free at the Topanga Library and down the road at the Malibu Library.
That's where I first heard the boy at the Malibu Library, and one of those free performances, Judith.
So do join us.
Well, there's a sign-up list in the back, that if you sign up on that list, you'll get notices about the Topanga stuff and
Tales by the Sea
Yeah.
stuff,
Yeah.
which Anne does.
And it's really with people like Judith and all of you here that we grow community and breathe new life into our visions. So I'm really glad that you all came. Thank you, and let's go have some coffee and snacks, and we'll see more of you and more of each other. Thanks.